Hello and welcome to Black Screen Archive. Please like, subscribe and slumber. Chapter 1. The room is quiet but not warm. There is no hearth, no flicker of flame. Only the pale grey of dawn seeps through a narrow slit in the wall, painting a long, cold beam across the stone floor. The child stirs, not with a cry, but a breath, shallow and uncertain. His skin, still bearing the scent of birth, meets the air like steel dipped in water. The midwife, weathered and without expression, wraps him not in cloth, but in a woven band of rough linen. No name is spoken yet. That must wait. In the land of Laconia, the year is 471 BCE. The city of Sparta rests between the towering ridges of Mount Taygetus and the soft, winding Eurotas River. But the world into which this child has arrived does not measure beauty in geography. It measures only strength, only function, only worth. His mother watches from the edge of the room, her hands bloodied and still. Her face is unreadable, carved like the marble votives placed at shrines. She has given birth before. She has lost before. But she knows this boy is different, not because she feels it, but because she must believe it. Because in Sparta, belief can be the difference between life and the cliff. Before the sun has risen fully, he is carried, without ceremony, through the dusty footpaths that knot the city, past the walls built not high and proud like Athens, but low and open, because the Spartan wall is its men. Past the bronze statues of Lycurgus, the lawgiver who centuries ago bound this city to its austere code. Toward the elders, the appella awaits. It is not a hall, but a place outside, under open sky, near the temple of Artemis Orthia. Here, men of the council gather in silence, clad in crimson cloaks and age. They do not ask the child's name. They do not ask after the mother's labor. They ask only one thing: is he worthy of Sparta? They examine the infant as one might inspect a blade. His limbs are measured by the eye. His breath is watched for rhythm. His joints, his skull, his spine, touched not with gentleness, but judgment. One of the men, his beard threaded with grey, nods once, slowly. The others follow. No words are exchanged. The child will live. Not all do. Each season, a few are carried instead to the edge of Mount Taygetus, to a narrow place called the Apothetae, the deposits. There, among rocks and wind and silence, the unfit are left, not out of malice, but necessity. A broken soldier is a burden, and Sparta does not carry burdens. Back in the home, the mother washes herself with cold water. No nurse is summoned. There are no celebrations, no feasts. The birth of a Spartan son is not a joy. It is a beginning, the beginning of discipline, of silence, of training, of war. The boy is given his name now, Ariston, the best. It is a name not to flatter, but to command. He will be held to it like an oath. For the first days, he knows little. He is swaddled tightly and placed in sunlight when there is any, or near stone when there is not. Wine is rubbed on his gums, not for pleasure, but to harden him, to test his tolerance, to steel him from within. He does not cry often, and when he does, he is not answered. Time moves slowly in infancy, but the habits form early. Ariston's world is defined not by toys or lullabies, but by the measured routines of the household. His mother teaches him not through touch, but example. She stands upright. She speaks little. Her eyes are always forward. By the time Ariston can sit upright without falling, he has already learned not to reach for more than he is given. When he tumbles, he does not wail. When he is hungry, he waits. These are not instincts. They are the result of absence. the absence of indulgence, the absence of softness. He watches his older brothers train in the courtyard, barefoot, bare-chested, their movements efficient and silent. They do not acknowledge him. That is not cruelty. That is the structure, the hierarchy. Each boy has his place, and Ariston's is at the bottom, waiting to be earned. His father is rarely seen, not absent, simply not permitted to linger. His place is at the Syssitia, among the other men, training or dining or guarding. When Ariston does see him, it is like seeing a statue move, immense, quiet, untouchable. At night, the boy is wrapped again, placed on a woven mat, and left in the dark. There are no cradle songs, no whispered comforts, only the rhythmic sound of breath and the rustle of leaves from the olive trees beyond the walls. Outside, Sparta continues its rhythm. The river flows, the mountains watch. The city sharpens itself in every moment. In the distance, young men train beneath the moon, their cries stifled by discipline. In the temple, priests burn offerings not for love, but for order. Within this order, Ariston begins to take form. By his first year, he can crawl with certainty and silence. By his second, he listens more than he speaks. By his third, he has begun to understand that food is not demanded, only accepted when given. That warmth is not found in comfort, but in control. Stories are told to him now, not with drama, but with weight, of Leonidas at Thermopylae, who stood against tens of thousands and did not yield, of King Agesilaus, born lame but rising to rule with strength unmatched, of Lycurgus, who gave Sparta its laws and vanished into legend, asking not to be worshipped but obeyed. These stories do not end with victory, nor with peace. They end with duty. Ariston listens. He does not interrupt. When asked to repeat them, he does so without flourish, without emotion. He learns the names, the deeds, the proper inflection, not because he is told they are important, but because they are all he is given. Each morning, he is taken into the courtyard and made to bathe in cold water, regardless of weather. This is not punishment, it is preparation. His muscles must know discomfort. His skin must not flinch. His lungs must breathe through cold and keep steady. At 5, he is permitted to watch the older boys spar. Their wooden swords strike not with playfulness, but with focus. The sounds are dull thuds, not clangs. Their instructors move among them like shadows, correcting, striking, reminding. He watches and begins to copy in private, not for reward, but because it feels correct. By 6, he can carry a small shield made of wicker. He holds it close. It is not yet heavy, but it will be. It will become an extension of him, as natural as his own limbs. It is the object by which he will live, and if necessary, die. And as his 7th year nears, a shift occurs. The family speaks even less. His belongings, few as they are gradually removed. His meals grow simpler. His mother begins to call him not by name but by title, child. Soon he will no longer be hers. Soon he will be Sparta's. He does not resist. He does not cry. On the morning of his 7th year, he wakes before the sun. His mother dresses him in a simple tunic. No shoes, no cloak. She says nothing. She places a piece of bread in his hand and guides him to the gate. There another woman waits. The two do not embrace. There are no tears. Only a look, long, final, proud. He walks away. The gate closes behind him. The Agoge begins. Chapter 2. The morning begins not with song, but with stillness. A thin veil of light creeps across the stone floor, stretching toward a row of sleeping figures. They lie side by side on woven mats, each one wrapped in the same thin cloth, each breath quiet, controlled, indistinguishable from the next. Among them is Ariston. He does not stir first nor last. The rhythm has already entered him. Wake with the light, move when the others do. 7 days ago, he was a child in a household. Now he is one of many, indistinct, a thread in a braid pulled tightly by the city's hand. The room smells of old straw and oiled wood. Outside, somewhere beyond the narrow walls, the sound of a river whispers faintly, but no one listens for it. Their ears stay tuned instead to the footsteps of the Paidonomos, the master of boys, whose sandals brush the earth like a metronome. The Agoge has begun. It is the year 464 BCE, in the midst of Sparta's quiet height. Wars have passed, others will come. But here, in the barracks near the Temple of Apollo, the true battle is fought silently, the war against the self. Ariston rises when he is meant to. He folds the mat without instruction. His hands are slow but precise, his eyes glancing side to side to see if the others finish more quickly. No one speaks, not even in greeting. The first lesson of the Agoge is not pain, nor hunger. It is silence. Silence sharpens the senses. It forces the body to express only what is necessary. In Sparta, to speak too often is to waste breath that could be used for action. The morning begins with running, barefoot over packed dirt, through olive groves and across uneven ground, dodging roots, slipping on stones. There is no encouragement, no applause, no voice telling him to keep going. The boys ahead of him do not look back. The ones behind do not complain. Ariston runs because he is meant to, because falling behind is to be noticed, and being noticed is not always safe. Breakfast is a piece of barley bread, dry and thin, dipped in oil only if the day before was without error. There is no meat, no sweetness. Food is not pleasure, it is fuel, and it is rationed carefully. The day stretches in strict lines. After running comes the lesson in discipline. Not with books, Spartans do not place trust in parchment, but with movement. The boys are lined in rows. They mimic the stance of a hoplite, knees bent, back straight, shields lifted, not real ones yet, but wooden, heavy enough to matter. Instructors move among them, correcting with taps, sometimes with strikes, not in anger, just enough to instruct. Pain sharpens memory. Ariston watches more than he moves. He studies the boy to his right, whose posture is always exact. He mimics it. He notices that this boy never rubs his eyes, never shifts his weight. So Ariston learns to still his fidgets, to lock his jaw when tired. Even when the sun reaches its height and the heat presses against their skin like cloth soaked in fire, he does not wipe his brow. Inside the training yard, there are no families. There is no mention of mothers, no memory of home. Affection is a memory that fades like smoke in wind. He tries not to picture his mother's face. It is too soft, too out of place here. Each night the boys gather in silence again. Sometimes a trainer speaks of the old wars, not to inspire but to instruct. He tells of King Leonidas, not with flair but with precision. He did not die for glory, the man says, his voice even low. He died because he stayed. That is the only choice. Ariston listens, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the torchlight. He imagines the narrow pass at Thermopylae, the scent of dust and blood, the shields locked tight like tiles. He does not picture victory, only the line, holding it. The boys are not entirely without company. There are the older ones, mentors of a sort, assigned to guide them, though not with kindness. One of them, named Theron, takes notice of Ariston. not for strength or speed, but for stillness, for listening. "You do not talk," Theron says to him one evening. Ariston blinks once, unsure if this is praise or warning. "Good," the older boy says. "Keep it that way." The days begin to blend. Hunger becomes normal. Bruises are expected. There are drills where the boys must fight with open hands, bare knuckles against one another's shoulders and chests. Not to win, but to endure. To learn the difference between injury and weakness. Pain is information. Only softness is a flaw. There is one boy who cries out just once when struck across the face. The next day, he's given double duty. No explanation, no warning. Just the understanding. Do not bring the inside out. Keep your voice in. At night, Ariston dreams of water, of the river he once glimpsed from his mother's courtyard, of olives falling in the dust. But each time he wakes, those images dissolve. They have no place here. In their place, new memories form. The snap of a reed against his calf when he is too slow. The rough leather of the practice shield pressed against his shoulder. The smell of sweat thick in the barracks. These sensations build a different kind of memory, one that lives in the body. On the 10th day, a test. A meal is left unattended in the corner of the barracks, a small bowl of figs and bread. The boys pass it again and again, their eyes drifting but feet never straying. It is a trap. Everyone knows this. Still, the scent hangs in the room like perfume, daring them. Ariston feels his hunger more sharply than usual. His stomach knots, but he does not move toward the bowl. He does not even allow his gaze to linger. His restraint is noticed. That evening, his portion is slightly larger. It is the only reward. One night, as the moon glows faintly through the narrow window slits, Theron sits beside him. The older boy says little, but his presence is steady. "You will become like stone," he says. "Not cold, just shaped." Ariston does not reply. He nods once, slow. "You were born for this," Theron adds. Ariston lies back. The mat is thin, the floor beneath unyielding. But he does not mind. His body has begun to understand. The world does not soften for him, so he will not soften for the world. The training continues, slow and relentless. Each boy becomes less a child and more a form. Their backs straighten without being told. Their eyes learn to scan, not wander. Their breath stays even in heat and pain. And though none of them say it, each one knows. They are no longer boys in a city. They are pieces of the city itself. Soon, they will be tested in more than drills, but not yet. For now, they endure. And in that endurance, Ariston begins to change, not visibly, not suddenly, but like iron beneath the hammer, imperceptibly, inevitably, reshaped. He is becoming Spartan. Chapter 3. The ground is cold beneath bare feet, and the air is thick with morning. No wind, no birdsong, only breath, dozens of them, all steady, all slow. Around Ariston, the other boys are already standing, their tunics brushed of dust, their backs straight as lances. He joins them in silence. One motion, one breath, one rhythm. They have been divided now, herded. No longer just a gathering of children, but a unit, an angel, a single body with many limbs. They sleep in the same stone hall. They eat together, run together, sweat together. Their names are spoken rarely. Most orders are given by glance or gesture. To be Spartan is not to speak. It is to obey. It is the year 462 BCE. In the north, the Delian League stirs, and the winds of war with Athens gather in distant skies. But here in the dry hills near the Eurotas River, The only war that matters is inward. The only enemy is softness. Each morning begins before the sun. A whisper of pink across the Parnon mountains is the only permission they need to rise. The pedonomos, silent but always near, watches with the patience of stone. His staff is carved of olive wood, smooth from use. It taps only when correction is needed. The boys have learned to fear its sound. Ariston feels the rhythm settle deeper each day. Muscles that once trembled under strain now hold shape. Movements that felt foreign now emerge without thought. When the instructor calls for drills, the herd flows into formation. Shields, wooden and worn, rise together. Feet shift. They march, turn, stop, without words. Uniformity is beauty. It does not matter if Ariston is strong or clever or fast. What matters is that he is unseen in the crowd, indistinguishable, that he follows, that he blends. When a boy steps out of line, even slightly, his heel too far, his shoulder off axis, the whole herd repeats the drill, again and again, until perfection. Discipline is not just taught, it is enforced by all. If Ariston falters, it is not only the instructor who corrects him, it is his peers. A swift strike to the ribs, a glare in the dark. Shame fell through silence. Meals are taken on stone benches beneath cypress trees. A thin broth, a heel of bread, no more unless earned. Conversation is sparse and only ever in the right tone. No laughter unless you are willing to answer for it. At night, they clean their mats and scrub their tunics. They tend to the practice yard. Tasks are not assigned. They are expected. The moment someone waits to be told, the staff finds them. And slowly, the boys forget what it felt like to choose. Ariston begins to dream less of home, less of his mother's courtyard or the hush of olive leaves. His thoughts, when they come, drift toward form, stance, posture, order. Even in rest, he adjusts his shoulders, checks the angle of his knees, runs silent drills in the dark. When one boy, smaller than the rest, fails to rise on time, the punishment is not his alone. The entire Agel is woken twice the next night. No explanation, no defense. They run. They scrub floors until their knuckles sting. They stand without cloaks under the wind, motionless until the moon has shifted. Ariston understands. His life is no longer his. His failure is theirs. Their failure his. The herd is everything. And yet, even in the stern uniformity, moments still linger like shadows. A glance held too long. A sharp breath taken when a blow lands too hard. These are not weaknesses, but reminders that beneath the uniform, the flesh still stirs. Theron, older now and watching from a distance, nods once when Ariston passes him in drill. No words, but it is enough. During lessons, they are read from Homer, not aloud, but in murmurs, as though poetry were a secret passed from one warrior to another. The Iliad mostly, not for entertainment, but for instruction. Ariston listens to the stories of Achilles, of Hector, of fate and fury, not for the glory of their battles, but the silence between their lines, the weight of duty, the emptiness of pride. He begins to understand why Spartans do not write history in their own hand. The only legacy worth having is one spoken by others, long after the shield has fallen. Some days they are sent to train in uneven fields. The soil is dry, scattered with stones. There they wrestle without instruction, not to win, not even to survive, but to adapt, to resist, to learn how to fall without fear. Ariston's lip splits one morning on a rock. Blood trails down his chin. He does not wipe it away. The older boys watch from the edge of the field. If someone cries out, they mark it. If someone flees the circle, they remember. Those names do not last long in the barracks. In time, Ariston learns the pauses between commands. He anticipates movement. He adjusts his pace to match the herd. He begins to forget the pitch of his own voice. He is not alone in this. The others do the same. They do not speak of it. They do not need to. On cold mornings, they do not huddle. On hot days, they do not wipe their brows. On days without food, they do not beg. The instructors call it Andrea, manliness. But it is more than that. It is the hollowing out of anything unessential. The Agoge does not fill. It strips away. One night, as the moonlight drips across the tiles of the barracks, Ariston lies awake, eyes open. The others are still. Their breath rises and falls like wind on grass. He traces the ceiling stones with his eyes, counting the lines. He no longer wishes for anything. He has become what he was meant to be. But ahead, he knows, are new trials. Not just drills and marches, but something darker. Whispers among the older boys. Tests beyond the wall. Days without food. Nights without sleep. A passage from boy to blade. He does not dread it. He does not long for it. He simply waits. Because that is the way of things here. The stone shapes the man. And in the darkness, Ariston is becoming stone. Chapter 4. The night stretched longer now, not in hours, but in weight. The air held still, pressed close, and the smell of worn cloth and old sweat lingered like something sacred. Ariston no longer noticed. In the dim light of the barracks, his eyes moved slowly from shadow to stone and back again. Rest came, but not comfort. Sleep was learned, like everything else. Earned, not offered. At 13, the rituals deepened. The body was no longer a thing to shape. It was a thing to test. Days bled into one another beneath the same sun. And still, no voice called him by name. His herd, his agel, moved as one shape. And he was now only a part of it, indistinct, necessary. The training fields had changed. No longer flat or swept of stone, but jagged and cruel in texture. Wrestling now took place under the open sky, on hard-packed earth laced with pebbles. When a boy fell, the sound was sharp. Dull thud of flesh, then silence. No cries, no wincing. A breath caught in the chest, then buried. Ariston learned quickly not to fall backward. His spine remembered before his mind did. The cold sting of bruised bone lingered, and so he adapted, rolling forward, using momentum, tightening every muscle to reduce the echo of impact. In Sparta, pain was not an event. It was a measurement, a scale. And over time, the boys were expected to rise on either side of it, carriers or collapsed. At dusk, they marched, not through streets, but out past the olive trees, where the land turned wild and the shadows leaned longer. The marches had no set distance, only duration. They walked without food, without water, each step an offering. The youngest limped silently, their bodies still growing into the harsh cadence of survival. When one boy stumbled and could not rise, the herd waited, not out of kindness, but to mark him. He would not be left behind, but he would not be forgotten either. Later that night, his portion of food was halved. His punishment was not the hunger. It was the gaze of his brothers when he rejoined them. Ariston did not stumble. He did not speak. He let the silence do the talking for him. As food grew scarcer, the instructors made clear a rule that had always existed, but now came forward like a whisper through the stones. You may take what you can if you are not caught. The rule was not permission. It was provocation. The boys began watching the kitchens. Bread left too long near a window. Dried figs stored in baskets outside the mess. A chicken that wandered too far from the coop. These were not meals. They were tests. Bait. Ariston waited. He learned the rhythms of the cook's steps, the way the guards rotated shifts, the angle of the moonlight against the stone. One night, he took a strip of dried meat from a hanging rack. He did not eat it, not at first. He sat with it under the eaves of the sleeping quarters, fingers brushing lightly over the rough, salted skin. Hunger clawed at him, but he did not rush. He took one bite, chewed slowly. It tasted of ash and dust and something he could not name. Not sweetness, not joy, just power. That power he kept to himself. Another boy, less careful, was caught with a stolen crust beneath his tunic. The punishment was swift and public. Stripped to the waist, he was whipped with a cane made of tamarisk wood, flexible, cruel. Each strike was timed, not to inflict pain alone, but to teach rhythm. Each wound had a purpose, a message. Ariston watched, unmoving. He did not flinch, not for the punished, not for himself. This too was instruction. In the barracks that night, the boy who had been whipped said nothing. He lay on his side, breath shallow. No one spoke to him. No one comforted him. That was not cruelty. That was the system. Pain was a part of them now. Just another layer, like muscle or memory. In time, the competitions began. Endurance contests, they were called. But there were no prizes, only tasks. Some involved holding a stance for hours, shield raised, legs bent, arms trembling under the weight. Others involved cold. They would be sent into the river at dawn, water like glass around their knees, and told to remain until the instructor gave word. There were days when Ariston could no longer feel his hands. His fingertips turned pale, stiff, and still he held the line. The instructors said little. They observed, marked things down with the eyes only. Words were rare but meaningful. When one said to Ariston, "You bend less than most," it was as if an entire festival had been sung in his name. At night, the barracks were quiet. Bodies lay side by side, some shivering, others still. The air smelled of oiled leather and raw skin. Ariston lay awake often, not from restlessness, but from vigilance. He studied the ceiling, tracing its lines, as if it might teach him something about permanence. The voice in his head had changed. It no longer echoed his thoughts from before, his mother's cadence, the memory of his father's footsteps. Now, it sounded like no one. It spoke in directives. It whispered only when it needed to. He found over time that joy became quieter too. It did not shout when he stole bread and went unnoticed. It did not laugh when he bested another in a drill. It simply pulsed, low, steady, like heat inside a forge. This was what Sparta made, not statues, not glory. It made heat that did not rise, fire that did not flare. A boy named Menes once broke his foot during a long march. He continued without limping. Only later, when the instructors found his swelling ankle, did they mark him. "You hit it well," one said. Menes said nothing. That was the victory. From that day forward, Ariston practiced the same. When bruised, he tightened the muscles around it. When exhausted, he adjusted his breathing. Pain, he understood now, was not the problem. The problem was letting anyone see it. And so he endured. In time, the faces of the herd blurred together. They were no longer separate. When one boy shifted, others did. When one stepped forward, the rest moved in kind. The instructors stopped saying names altogether. Ariston did not miss his. As the seasons shifted, the winds became colder. They were not given cloaks. That was the test. The cold was not the enemy. Comfort was. Warmth made the mind soft. Cold made it alert. He welcomed it. There were nights when frost settled along the edge of the barrack floor, when the breath of 50 boys hung in the dark like smoke. And still, no one curled in on themselves. They lay flat. They endured. Outside, the olive trees stood silent, and in that silence, so did Ariston. Chapter 5. The morning light bled slowly over the ridge, soft and pale as worn parchment, casting long shadows across the dirt of the training ground. Dew clung to olive branches, to armor straps, to the thin red cloaks folded neatly beside the rows of boys. No words passed between them. They stood in silence, in rows of 6, spears upright beside each shoulder, sandals planted firmly in the coarse gravel. The earth beneath them was hard-packed and pitted with the memory of drills long since done. Ariston stood at the edge of the first line, chest steady, eyes forward. His body no longer ached the way it once had. It hummed instead, quietly, consistently, with the dull discipline of familiarity. Every muscle remembered its place. Every tendon knew what came next. A voice, low and deliberate, cut through the air, not loud, not urgent, just clear. Advance. The boys stepped in unison, not a moment's hesitation. Feet moved as one. Shields rose, spears angled. The line breathed, shifted, tightened, like a single creature waking from sleep. Phalanx drills began in the cool hush of morning and lasted until the air turned thick and white with heat. They marched in square formations, bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, each boy responsible not just for his stance, but for the shield of the one beside him. Ariston learned that in this formation, strength came not from speed, nor size, nor cleverness, but from unity. There was no room for error. A single boy breaking rank left the flank exposed. A faltering shield could endanger the entire row. So they learned to listen, not to orders, but to each other. The breath of the boy to the right, the footfall of the boy behind, the rustle of fabric, the angle of a spearhead just inside the edge of their vision. And slowly, rivalry began to fade. They had once measured themselves against each other, in strength, in cunning, in how long they could hold a stance or go without food. But now, each boy became more valuable as part of the whole. Ariston no longer watched the others to outdo them. He watched them to support them. When a boy stumbled, Ariston shifted slightly left to cover him. When Ariston's grip slipped, another steadied his spear with a light nudge. No one spoke. The cohesion was instinctive, forged not in affection but repetition. In the afternoons, they practiced the pirish, the martial dance. At first, Ariston had thought it strange. Movement meant for war reduced to rhythm, to breath timed with steps, to choreographed sweeps and pivots. But over time he began to understand. The dance was a language. It taught timing, spacing, fluidity. It taught beauty, yes, but a beauty that moved like iron through water. The rhythm sank into his bones. At dusk, their voices rose in chants, slow and low, echoing against the long walls of the training ground. Not songs of celebration. These were chants of lineage, of battles fought, of kings fallen and laws given. Names like Leonidas, Cleombrotus, and Pausanias flowed through the words, wrapped in syllables that shaped identity. Sometimes, as the sun fell behind Mount Taketus, Ariston would feel something stir. Not emotion, not quite, but something deeper. a kind of presence, as though the dead stood with them in formation, as though their shield still held the line. He didn't speak of it. One evening, after a long series of push drills, boys pressed shield to shield, legs braced, breath tight. Ariston found himself beside a boy he'd once viewed as a rival, tall, fast, sharp in his movements. They had clashed before, not with blows but with glances, pride, unspoken. Now, their backs touched as they fended off a mock ambush. Ariston heard the boy grunt behind him as pressure mounted. Without thinking, he shifted his weight, angled slightly to take more force. The boy didn't thank him. He didn't need to. Later that night, they sat near the water trough, dipping cloth to clean their arms. A silence passed between them. Not strained, not forced, just quiet. That was brotherhood. It didn't ask for acknowledgement. It only asked to show up, to stand firm, to cover the gap. The training intensified as summer deepened. Mock battles sprawled across the southern fields near the river, where terrain shifted from flat dust to brush and incline. Instructors watched from shaded outcrops, noting formation errors, missed cues, faltering lines. They trained with wooden weapons, heavier than the real ones, to strengthen their grip. Bruises were expected. Welts became maps of progress. Ariston bore his like marks of rain on clay, visible, but not spoken of. In one drill, a sudden flank maneuver caught the rear of the phalanx off guard. The line rippled, broke. Ariston pivoted, shield raised and barked. Not a command, but a name. Just one. A boy who was slow to turn. The name landed like stone. The boy snapped back into place. The line held. Afterwards, there were no commendations. Only a nod from one of the older boys. "You learn," he said. That was enough. Evenings brought the long rituals. Chants by firelight, recitations of law. The reading of Homer, still permitted as the only text worth committing to memory. Ariston knew lines by heart now. The death of Hector, the grief of Achilles. Not because they were beautiful, but because they held truths beneath the surface. Duty, fate, restraint. The others knew them too. In the dark, as they lay on mats, someone would sometimes whisper a line. Even a fool learns, once he's suffered. A pause, then quiet again. They didn't say who the fool was, or what the lesson had been. One morning, as they filed into formation, Ariston saw the same boy he had once covered now take the front left position. A hard post, the shield anchor. He stepped into place without hesitation. Ariston followed. The line moved. The dust rose. The chant began. They were no longer boys chasing approval. They were the wall now, living, breathing, no longer wondering what manhood meant. They were becoming it, stroke by stroke, march by march, until the shape of themselves blurred into the unit they belonged to. Ariston still remembered his name, but he no longer needed it. Chapter 6. The moon hung low, a dull silver coin resting against a sky drained of colour. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just a quiet summons after evening drills, a brief word spoken beneath breath, and a nod from an older instructor. Ariston followed without question. His body knew how to move quietly now, not as habit, but as instinct. It was the year 459 BCE. The air carried the faint mineral scent of river stones, and a dry breeze shifted the tall grasses that grew at the edge of Sparta's southern fields. Beyond them, the wild began. It was into that quiet and unmarked space that Ariston stepped, and the others with him. Not many, no more than a dozen. They did not speak, they did not look to one another. Each had been chosen, and each understood what that meant. There was no explanation, only a black cloak, heavier than the red he was used to, folded and placed in his arms. The Krypteia had begun. For years, Ariston had trained to move with others, to march, to strike, to hold the line. But this was different. The line was gone. There was no formation, no brother beside him to mirror his step. He moved alone now through pine and olive, the underbrush thick with the scent of sap and the sound of insects brushing against bark. Nights were long, slow, and silent. He walked barefoot. It was required. Leather would make too much noise. His feet bled the first few nights. The ground was rough, littered with stones and thorns, but he did not stop. He wrapped his heels in strips torn from the hem of his tunic and kept moving. During the day, he hid, not in fear, but in discipline. The Krypteia did not train during daylight. They waited, watched, rested in shade where eyes could scan fields unnoticed. Helot villages dotted the valley in the north, simple places, reed-roofed, scattered with wells and garden rows. The Helots worked the land of Sparta, bound to it without freedom, without vote. They outnumbered citizens many times over, and so fear was necessary. Each night, Ariston descended from the hills. He crept past small fires and low stone walls. He listened to dogs stir in sleep, to old men cough, to children shift beneath wool blankets. He marked patterns, who moved where when the fields were watered, how the patrols shifted. He was not there to kill indiscriminately. He was there to study, to decide, and sometimes, when the decision was made, to act. The act was swift, always silent. No witnesses, no sound. That was the test. In the training fields, pain had been a teacher. Here the lesson was something else, something heavier. In the moment before each strike, Ariston felt a silence deeper than anything he had known, a silence that stretched behind him, into his past, and ahead of him, into something darker still. He did not hesitate. He had been taught to follow the law, and the law said that Sparta must rule through fear, that Helots must be reminded of their place, that those who were too strong, too bold, too visible, must disappear. Still, something lingered in him, not regret, not shame, but a pause, a question that he would not speak aloud. Some nights he did not strike. He would lie in the dry grasses for hours, watching a lantern flicker behind a thin curtain, listening to the sounds of sleep drift through the cracks of a wooden door. He would trace the lines of the stars overhead, the arc of Lyra and the long spine of Scorpius, and he would wait. Wait until the sky lightened, until the danger had passed, until the need was gone. Then he would vanish again. By day he drank from springs. He ate what he found, berries, roots, the occasional bird. His knife dulled from use, and he learned how to sharpen it on stones worn smooth by the river. His cloak grew heavy with dust, his hands calloused and cracked, and always the silence grew. When he returned, weeks later, there was no celebration, no welcome, only a quiet glance from a captain, a nod, and a place at the edge of the training grounds. He had passed. No one asked what he had done. No one told him what he would carry. He joined the line again, this time at the front. Older now, leaner. Something in his eyes had shifted, not harder, but quieter, like a flame that burned low, steady, without smoke. At night, he slept without dreams, and when he awoke, the sun found him ready. Chapter 7. The sun moved slow and high, spilling light across stone and olive leaf, catching the faint threads of dust that drifted upward from the earth as if unwilling to settle. It was early spring, the year 457 BCE, and the riverbanks beyond the city had begun to green. A quiet, familiar breeze brushed through the cypress groves and lingered in the courtyards of Sparta's heart, stirring nothing, but moving everything forward. Ariston stood beneath the same open sky he had trained under for 13 years. His back was straight, his eyes were level. Around him were others, some he had grown beside since childhood, some older, some younger, all marked now by the same silence, the same posture, the same absence of uncertainty. No commands were spoken. Each knew what came next. Before him, folded neatly atop polished stone, lay the red cloak and the round, bronze-rimmed hoplon. The cloak, bright in colour, simple in form, had always been worn by the men who trained them, who disciplined them, who led them into drills and chants and pain. Now it was theirs. He reached forward and lifted it. The fabric was thicker than he expected, wool, heavy and warm even in the soft air of morning. He drew it across his shoulders slowly, letting it rest along his spine and fall to the back of his knees. No fastening pin, no ornament, just the weight of the cloth itself, enough to remind him of what it now meant to carry it. Next came the shield, the hoplon, nearly 3 feet across, perfectly round, backed with leather, rimmed in bronze. It had no decoration, no crest. It needed none. It was the boundary of his body, the breath of the man beside him, the promise of a life spent never turning away. He held it in both hands, then slipped his left arm through the inner brace. It was not light. It pressed downward gently, like a palm to the shoulder. No oaths were spoken aloud. No hymns were sung. The transition into full citizen warrior happened not in voice, but in presence. Each movement was understood. Each step was known. They left the ceremonial ground in rows, but less like boys and more like anchors walking upright. He felt no elation, no swelling of pride, just stillness. Deep and firm, like the quiet beneath river stones. That evening, he entered the Syssitia for the first time as a peer. The mess hall was built low, its walls bare and dark with age. The long tables were of rough wood, smoothed over years of elbows and hands, and bowls scraped clean of broth. The room smelled of roasted pork, of barley bread, of sweat and leather. It was not unfamiliar. He had served here before, carrying food, sweeping ash, receiving orders. But tonight, he sat. His place had been marked with a single flat stone. No name, no symbol, just placement. To his left, a man of 30. To his right, one older still, his beard beginning to silver. The bowls came, passed by hand. The bread was torn, dipped in broth, shared without need for words. The wine was watered, poured carefully. No one toasted. The men did not speak often. When they did, it was with tone, not volume. Their jokes, when they came, were dry, short, drawn through grit and smoke. Their silences held respect, not awkwardness. Ariston listened, ate, watched. This was not a celebration. It was continuity. Later, as night deepened and the hall emptied, he stepped outside. The air had cooled, and the moon hung sharp above the rooftops, framed by the broken arms of fig trees. He walked slowly down the stone path toward the armory, hearing his own footsteps now as part of the city's rhythm, rather than separate from it. There was a clarity in it. Not joy, not relief, just clarity. He was now a man of Sparta, and that meant something narrow, but deep. It meant there was no self to guard, no legacy to build for the sake of ego. His duty was to the line, to the man beside him, to the silence that came before the order, to the space held between shields, and to the discipline that kept it unbroken. When he returned to his quarters, he unrolled his mat on the stone. The same size as before, the same place. Nothing had changed, but everything had. He lay down, cloak folded beside him, shield propped near his feet. His body, still and calm, settled easily into rest. In the dark, there were no memories demanding to be remembered. Only a thought, soft and steady. Tomorrow, he would hold the line. Chapter 8. The morning broke slowly, not with sound, but with the soft lifting of darkness from the stones. Pale light crept in from the east, brushing over the sleeping ground like fingers over old linen. A slight wind moved through the olive trees beyond the training fields, rustling their leaves like whispered names, ancient and remembered. Ariston stirred, but not suddenly. His eyes opened before the sun cleared the ridge, before the horns, before the others. The cloak beneath him was folded, not for comfort, but habit. His shield rested nearby, leaned against the wall, its bronze edge catching the faintest glimmer of pre-dawn. It was never far. A Spartan did not sleep apart from his arms. He rose without noise, body practiced, motion unbroken. His breath was slow even. He moved as he had every day for years, each gesture drawn from the same deep well. The morning was a ceremony in itself. He did not think of it. It simply was. Beyond the barracks, the others were gathering, young men still stiff with sleep, their sandals scuffing dust, tunics clinging with the cool of early air. Ariston stepped among them. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence was known, not in title, but in tempo. They walked together toward the open ground, a wide swath of earth hardened by footfall, edged by low stone markers and scrub. The phalanx would form here today, as it had yesterday, and would again tomorrow. A ritual not for the gods, but for the line, for the bond. Drills began as the sky warmed. Shields lifted. Spears found their angle. Sandals bit the dust. No commands barked, only the rhythm of movement. The subtle calls passed through motion. The step forward, the lean, the slight tightening of the line. Each soldier moved not as himself, but as an extension of the whole. This was the phalanx. To an outsider, it might seem rigid, impersonal, but to Ariston, it was sacred. Each man's shield overlapped the next. His own shield did not protect him. It protected the man beside him. And he, in turn, was protected by another. To hold formation was not to fight. It was to exist in trust. He remembered the first time he truly felt it. Years ago, in a field outside Amy Clay, during a spring drill. The line had swayed under pressure, an unexpected flank, and the younger soldiers had wavered. He had stepped forward then, not to lead, but to anchor. His shield met another's. The line held. He remembered the silence after, the nod from a captain, the breath shared between warriors who had not spoken a word. Today, he watched one of the younger men, barely of age, struggling to maintain his angle, his grip faltering as the heat rose. Ariston stepped closer by a pace, tightening the leftward pull, absorbing just enough pressure to let the boy recover. He said nothing. The boy adjusted. The shield line remained unbroken. There was beauty in it, not of art, but of function. The way a bridge holds or wall stands long after the builders have gone. When the drill ended, they stood still in place, breathing in unison, the dust settling back around their feet like water around stone. Later, in the shade of the stoa, The men sat in loose circles, rubbing shoulders, passing bread, their voices low. Not jovial, not cold, familiar. Stories of drills past, of captains with short tempers, of formations that had nearly failed, and didn't. Ariston did not often speak in these moments. He listened. The rhythm of their voices felt like another kind of formation. Laughter came, but short and dry. No one gestured broadly. No one shouted. Even in rest, they remained contained. As the sun climbed and the heat thickened, they returned to the field for a different kind of drill. The wall test, they called it. Push drills. Each man braced behind his shield, body curled low, legs firm. The opposing line pressed forward, slow and brutal. Dust lifted around their feet. Breath came in bursts. Shields groaned under pressure. Every muscle trembled, not from pain, but from purpose. The line wavered, then caught, then held. It always held. Ariston dug his feet into the dirt. The weight of the man behind him pressed forward. His shield pressed into the back of the man in front. There was no space for thought, only stance, only breath. When the order came to break, the relief was not celebration. It was reverence, as if a trial had passed and found them worthy again. In the quiet after, as the others rested, Ariston walked alone for a time, away from the field, past the low outer wall, into a grove where the air cooled and the wind smelled of bark and iron. He sat beneath a gnarled tree, the kind that grew without permission, and let his hand rest on the rim of his shield. It was marked not just with wear, but memory. He had carried it for years. Not once had he let it fall. To lose one's shield was the greatest shame, not because of fear, but because of failure. A shield was not for the self. It was the bond, the unspoken promise that a Spartan would hold his place, even if the enemy rose higher than he had imagined, even if the world seemed to burn. He traced a crack along the bronze edge with his thumb, slow, deliberate. In that moment, he did not think of victory. He did not dream of glory. He thought only of the line, of how it must hold, of how the strength of one meant nothing without the others. When the horn sounded in the distance, calling them back to the city's edge, he stood slowly, cloak falling back across his shoulders, dust curling around his sandals. The wind moved through the trees again, gentler now, like a hand across water. He walked back without rush. The weight of his shield was not heavy, not anymore. It was part of him. Chapter 9. The room was always cool, even in the high weeks of summer, the kind of cool that settled into the stone and stayed there, unmoved by the sun. Its walls were thick, earthen-coloured, lined with marks where years of sandals had brushed against them in passing. No adornments hung there, no symbols, no names, just space, bare, patient, enduring. Morning passed slowly, as it always did, and now the light had grown soft with evening, stretching long across the warm floor of the mess hall. The Syssitia. There were many like it across Sparta, but this one, this particular room, was Ariston's. He entered quietly. No formal greeting, no nods exchanged. The benches, low and smoothed by decades of use, formed two long rows beneath a single timbered ceiling. The wood creaked sometimes with wind, but never from within. Spartan men moved carefully, predictably. Even in hunger, they preserved their rhythm. He took his seat near the end of the row, as always. Third from the corner, beside a man named Dracon, who seldom spoke, and across from Theras, who chewed slower than anyone Ariston had ever met. These small truths did not change. That was the point. The bowl passed down from hand to hand, stone, shallow, marked with tiny scratches from ladles long retired. In it, black broth, thickened by pig's blood, garlic, vinegar. No seasoning, no indulgence. It filled the stomach. It reminded the tongue to forget. Beside the bowl came barley bread, dense and dark, and a single fig placed upon a ceramic shard that once had been part of something else. There was no servant, no hierarchy at the table. Each man served and received the same. Rank ended at the threshold of the syssitia. Across from him, Theras dipped his bread slowly, eyes on nothing, fingers worn and careful. Drakon nodded once toward the fig, but did not reach for it. The moment passed. This was not silence of discomfort nor reverence. It was simply the absence of waste. Words, like food, were portioned only when useful. The room held 24 men that night, the same as the night before, and the week before that. The number rarely changed. Once, a man had failed to return from a skirmish near Tegea. His place had remained empty for 9 days before another filled it. No one remarked on it, but they had all felt it. There was an odd peace in the repetition. The scrape of wood on stone as bowls were passed, the low clearing of a throat, the occasional story shared, not dramatic, not embellished. A lesson, perhaps, from a battle long ago, or a moment recalled from training days, meant to remind, not entertain. Tonight, an older man at the far end spoke briefly of his own father, a hoplite who had fought at Plataea. He described the moment when the Persian line broke, not with flourish, but with a kind of reverent dryness, like reading from etched bronze. No one interrupted. The story settled in the room like dust in a corner, unbothered, accepted. Ariston ate slowly, methodically. The broth was as it always was, bitter, dense. The bread firm in the jaw, satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with taste. He did not glance up often. There was no need. He knew the rhythm of this space, knew the way each man moved, when they paused, when they exhaled. And yet, tonight, something shifted. A younger man, new to the mess, his name not yet fully learned, broke the bread too quickly. He reached before the bowl had fully settled in his hands. The motion was small, but it was out of time. No one corrected him. No voice called him out, but the space around him stiffened slightly, like water touched by a drop of oil. The man to his left adjusted his position, subtly angled his body away. A pause passed through the group, thin as a breath held too long. Then it resumed. Later, when the meal had ended, and the bowls were stacked and the bread reduced to crumbs, Ariston walked the edge of the courtyard behind the mess. The stones were still warm from the day, though the sky had cooled. The moon sat low and soft behind a veil of thin clouds. In the trees, birds rustled quietly, settling in. He thought of that small break in rhythm, that single gesture. It was not judgment he felt, it was memory of his own early days in the syssitia, when everything still felt sharp, uncertain, when he still searched for praise in quiet rooms. That instinct had faded, worn down by repetition, by time, by the settling of ego into function. The meals were not meant to nourish, not just. They were reminders of equality, of discipline, of presence. No one received more, no one left early, no indulgence lived here. And in that austerity, there was peace. He returned to his place, folded his cloak, and rested. The sounds of Sparta at night were few. The wind through reed roofs, the low bark of a dog in the hills, a voice, faint and far, reciting something old. He did not think of battle. He did not think of glory. He thought only of tomorrow's bowl, tomorrow's bread, the same seat among the same men. And he felt steady. A stone. Chapter 10. The city was quiet in the way only Sparta could be, still not from emptiness, but from discipline. Stones cooled beneath the soles of sandals. The narrow alleys held onto the warmth of day, though the sky above had softened into blue-black. A few torches flickered behind shuttered windows, their flames dancing low, never wasteful. Ariston stepped carefully from the Syssitia hall, his cloak folded over one shoulder, his gait unhurried but deliberate. He moved through the familiar spaces like water finding its level, taking each corner as though it were his first and last time passing through it. There were no goodbyes. No one asked where he went. The others knew or guessed, and that was enough. His steps found the rhythm of stone. One foot, then the other, pressed into the quiet. The mess hall behind him slowly faded into shadow, and he passed under the open beams of a colonnade where the moonlight filtered through in soft stripes. He did not look up. He didn't need to. The path was fixed in his body now, carried more in the bones than the mind. He walked past fig trees, their leaves resting still, their fruit not yet ripe. The scent of earth and olive oil clung faintly to the air, mixed with ash from the hearths that had long gone out. A dog barked once, far away, then fell silent. The world narrowed into footsteps. Tonight was not different. And yet, it was. She lived at the edge of the inner quarter, in a home built of clean lines and silent corners. A single door, a garden within its walls. He had entered it many times and still never seen it in full daylight. That was the way. Spartan law did not forbid marriage, but it folded it into shadows, made it part of the fabric, not the pattern. Men lived in barracks until 30. Wives waited in twilight. He reached the gate and paused, placing one hand against the frame. Not knocking, just being, just letting presence speak where speech would disrupt. A moment passed, then another. The door opened. She said nothing. He stepped inside. The house was modest, stone and timber, cool in its silence. She led him to the inner room, always the same one, where a lamp burned low and steady in a dish of oil. The light caught her face in halves, one side shadow, the other gold. She met his eyes, then turned away, not with coldness, but with ease. A rhythm long practiced. They sat near the lamp, not quite touching. The room carried the scent of time and pressed wool, of time folded into routine. She poured water. He drank. She did not ask about the drills, about the marches, about the weight of the shield. He did not ask about the market, or the neighbors, or what she did when the sun was high. Their lives ran alongside each other like rivers near the same plain, close, but not often meeting. He watched her hands move as she cleaned a small blade, folding a cloth around the hilt, pressing her fingers along its spine with care. Her nails were short, her knuckles calloused. He had seen those hands grip wood and thread, carry water, gesture across space. They were hands made for doing, not for display. And when she finished, she placed the cloth aside, and they sat together with no need for anything more. They had no children, not yet. It was spoken of occasionally, not as yearning, but as duty, part of the order of things, as natural as eating, as inevitable as battle. Sons to train, daughters to wed, names to carry forward, not for legacy, but for Sparta. He sometimes imagined a boy, not a vision, not a hope, just a form, small, watching, learning, how he would walk, how he would be taught to be silent before he could be loud, Whether he would carry Ariston's eyes, whether she would teach him how to hold a knife with the same careful firmness. But these were not things to dwell on. Not here, not now. He shifted slightly. She leaned back. The lamp made their shadows dance lightly on the wall, two figures still and flickering. Their closeness was not need, it was recognition. He placed a hand on the mat beside hers. She did not move away. Their fingers did not entwine. They simply remained near but not folded. Intimacy in Sparta was not performance, it was presence. They lay down later, side by side, on the reed mat near the back wall. The night grew deeper, darker. The oil in the lamp grew low. The quiet grew warmer. No vows were spoken, no promises exchanged. Neither asked the other to be more than they already were. When he left, it was just before dawn. She opened the door again, just as quietly, and he stepped back into the world of stone and expectation. The street was even quieter than before, if such a thing were possible. His cloak wrapped tighter around him now. The morning air had not yet lifted its weight from the rooftops. He passed once more through the fig trees, through the open colonnade, through the arch that marked the outer edge of the mess quarter. The first of the men would be waking soon. Bread would be broken. Drills would begin. And he would be there, not changed, but steadied. He reached his quarters, unrolled his mat, and let the silence return. The air inside was cold again, but he did not mind, because for a few hours something else had lived within him, small, quiet, and warm, and that was enough. Chapter 11. The morning opened with haze resting low over the field, silver white and unmoving, as though the earth itself had paused between breaths. Dew still clung to the reed stalks near the training grounds. The sun was slow in its rising, its light not yet firm, but promising warmth to come. The kind of morning that made no demands, only watched and waited. Ariston stood at the edge of the field, not as he once had, with shield in hand, muscles primed, but now with arms folded behind his back, cloak gathered loosely around his shoulders. His stance was no less certain, but the certainty had changed. It no longer surged, it held. A group of boys moved in formation before him, younger, leaner. The generation that had once looked up to him had become instructors themselves. Now, this was the next layer. New limbs, untested hands, voices still uncertain in tone and command. They wore their tunics too tight in places, their sandals scuffed from overcorrection. They were learning, and the field was patient. The drills began. A simple advance. 4 steps forward, shields locked, spears angled. Stop. Then again, and again. The dust stirred lightly around their feet, dry and fine. It had taken him years to realize that the sound of it, the muted scuff of sandal over soil, was his own kind of music. One boy stumbled. His left foot struck too wide, and his shield edge left the line. Only a sliver, but enough. Ariston stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was weighted now, and the boys had learned to read its shape. He stopped beside the boy and crouched, his knees bending slower than they once had, but steady. He took the edge of the shield, adjusted it by a finger's width, then met the boy's eyes. The boy nodded faintly. There was no shame, only adjustment. Ariston rose again. The line moved forward once more, this time cleaner. He watched them, not with hope, not with doubt, only attention. That was all they needed now. Years ago, he would have stood where they stood. His body had known the drill not in thought but in motion. It had risen with the sun and carried stone and shield until the days blurred. Pain had been a constant then, not unwelcome. It carved out space inside a man, not to be filled, but to be remembered. Now pain came differently, not sharp, but deep, not in flesh, but in time. He placed a hand on the wooden post beside him, fingers brushing the grain. This post had stood for 2 generations. It had absorbed more strikes than could be counted, and yet it still held, weathered, but upright, like so much in Sparta. A voice called to him, Theron, now captain of this training cohort. Theron had once been the boy beside him in the phalanx, the one who had taken blows without flinching, who had covered Ariston's side when formations bent. Now he led, and Ariston observed. "Would you speak to them?" Theron asked, eyes scanning the line. Ariston shook his head. "They know enough," he said. "What they need will come through repetition." Theron nodded. He understood. Words had their place, but not here. Not when the body could learn it better. He walked the perimeter of the field as drills shifted. Shield testing now. Boys struck the wooden targets with their full weight, rebounded, then repositioned. Some grunted. One cried out without meaning to. He was not punished, but the next time, he held the cry inside. Ariston watched a particular boy. Dark hair, wide shoulders, a little fast on the pivot. The same mistake Ariston used to make. Speed over steadiness. The boy reminded him of himself, but only faintly. It was not the features that echoed. It was the shape of the error. The boy corrected himself by the 3rd repetition. Slowed. Aligned. The movement grew smoother. Ariston felt a quiet satisfaction settle in the chest. Not pride, not in the loud sense, but something more like continuity, as if a thread had passed through time, unbroken. He left the field before the session ended. Theron would finish it. The walk back was long and slow, past the fields where wheat bent in the wind, past the shrine where mothers tied cloth to the trees for protection, past the silent barracks where new soldiers still slept on mats, their dreams shaped by drills. He passed a boy on the road, perhaps 10, carrying water in a shallow clay basin. The boy nodded to him. Ariston returned it. The boy would likely enter the Agoge soon. Another thread beginning. He entered the hall reserved for council veterans. Not yet a member, but permitted to sit in the shadows and listen. The men spoke quietly, discussing training rotations, food supplies, alliances, the usual matters of order. No one raised their voice. Their beards were streaked with white. Their cloaks bore the wear of decades. These were men who had not chased honor, but had earned it by not chasing. Ariston said little. When asked, he offered his views succinctly. When not asked, he listened. The younger officers often looked to him before deciding. They didn't always realize it, but their eyes found his before their mouths moved. Afterward, he walked again, through the empty corridors of the gymnasium, past the low outer walls where wildflowers pressed up through cracks. The air smelled of thyme and dust. He stopped once to lean against a tree, an old pine with a bent spine. He stood there a while, eyes closed, listening to the rustling branches. He remembered being 15, watching his instructor do the same, leaning, silent, a figure then of mystery, strength. He had never imagined being in that place. And now here he was. The wind moved again, the smell of ash in it now. Perhaps someone nearby had lit a morning fire. He turned back toward the training ground. The sun was climbing now. The field would be quiet soon, swept, reset, waiting for the next wave. He would walk it again tomorrow, not to fight, but to be seen, because legacy in Sparta was not spoken. It was modelled. It was steadiness under scrutiny. It was the silence of one man becoming the shape by which others found their footing. And as he stepped across the threshold of the field once more, his shadow stretched out before him, long, unbroken, ordinary, and enough. Chapter 12. The morning did not begin with pain. It began with light, slow and cool, spreading like a hand across the stone floor where Ariston had placed his sandals the night before. His knees ached faintly, but the ache no longer announced itself. It had become part of the rhythm of waking, just as his breath, now shallow but steady, pulled in the dry air of early spring, scented faintly with olive bark and damp straw. He sat up slowly, hands bracing the weight that once rose easily. There was no hurry, no summons. The cloak he reached for was folded neatly, its faded red worn soft by time. When he tied it across his shoulder, the motion was not ceremonial. It was muscle memory, older than his son's, older than the line that marked his jaw, older than any one man's pride. Outside, Sparta murmured. The city had always spoken this way in the mornings, through the shuffling of sandals over stone, the wooden click of a gate closing softly, the hiss of a small fire being coaxed to life. It was a city that never raised its voice. Discipline did not need to. He walked slowly toward the river path. It had been years since he joined the drills himself. Years since the spear calloused his hands or the shield strained his shoulder. But he still woke early. He still walked. Some habits held their shape long after the body forgot why they were formed. At the edge of the Eurotas, where the reeds bent low and the stones remained slick from night dew, he sat on the flat rock he'd claimed without ever needing to say it. The water moved quietly beside him, reflecting only enough light to mark the shape of morning. He thought often, now, of the river. It had carried the blood of boys when they trained too hard and fell. It had cooled the feet of soldiers marching home from Plataea. He had stood in it as a child, arms crossed tight against his chest, while older men judged his stillness. And later, he had watched his own son do the same, jaw clenched, eyes wide, trying to be unshaken. Ariston had not nodded. He had not needed to. That boy had grown, and in time, Ariston had watched his grandson take the same test, under the same instructors. Different names, same eyes, same silence. But no, not quite the same. They had not been tested in war, and neither had he. He had served. He had trained. He had bled in drills, in border patrols, in the mountains during skirmishes with Arcadian raiders. But never the Great War. Never the call to Thermopylae, to Plataea, to the moments that carved names into stone. And so, he would not have his. Spartan law was clear. Die in childbirth, if a woman. Die in battle, if a man. Only then would your name be spoken. Only then would a marker bear it. He had lived too long. There was no bitterness in that. But there was awareness, a kind of quiet absence that lived beneath the ribs, not grief, but a hollow. He had trained boys who had died young and were remembered. He had taught his own blood to hold a spear, to brace a shield, to walk silently, and not all of them remembered where those lessons had come from. But it didn't matter. They were his, all of them. Every boy who'd learned to step in time because he had shown them. Every man who'd corrected his grip because Ariston had said nothing, only demonstrated. Sons, grandsons, some by name, most not. They were the continuation, whether they knew it or not. He reached down and touched the water's edge, letting his fingers trail through the current. Some days, when he listened closely, he imagined hearing his own instructors' voices in the flow of it. Short phrases, clipped syllables, instructions without warmth but never without care, echoes that lived longer than their speakers. He rose slowly, joints stiff but unshaken, and returned toward the city. He paused near the edge of the training field, where young men struck shields against posts in perfect rhythm. One faltered, another corrected. The line reformed. He said nothing. He turned toward the shrines, past the columned temple where the names of the fallen were carved into marble. They were clean and sharp, each line dug deep by a chisel wielded with purpose. He walked past them without stopping. He would not be among them. He reached his quarters as the sky shifted from soft blue to pale gold. The mat was still cool. He sat beside it, cloak folded once more. The breath in his chest was steady, but slow now. There was no ceremony, no horn, no call. He let his eyes close, not from exhaustion, but from peace. And though his name would not be written in stone, it lived in the forms, in the footfalls, in the quiet commands passed between men too young to know who taught them how to hold still.